Alright, so this video focuses on Simone de Beauvoir. So Simone de Beauvoir is a very famous philosopher and very closely connected with Sartre. So Jean-Paul Sartre was the figure that we studied previously, and he believed in radical freedom. He believed that we were absolutely free to determine the meaning and value of our world. And Simone de Beauvoir was a close associate of Sartre's. In fact, they were lovers at certain times of their life. They're great personal friends, and both brilliant, absolutely brilliant individuals. In fact, there's a funny story that when Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir were both going to college together, and they gave their final examinations, they wrote their final paper, and there was a competition each year to see which student would be the best, which paper got the highest marks at the Sorbonne in Paris. And she actually got it originally, but they didn't want to give it to a woman, so they changed the scores and they gave it to Sartre. So she is brilliant. And she, even though she would often defer, she'd often say, well, Sartre is the real philosopher in the relationship, and defer to him as the philosopher. But she's often credited with bringing Sartre to a more concrete understanding of freedom. So what we had studied the previous session was this notion of Sartre's absolute freedom. He keeps essential elements of that throughout his career, but he does modify that a little bit. He does say that the concrete and the social matter more than he originally thought. And part of that is because of Simone de Beauvoir. And so she essentially says, look, what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, you have the same basic freedom. However, how that is applied and how that is experienced is fundamentally different. She said men live as subjects. In other words, men live in control of their lives. Women live as the other, as the ones that are defined. And so the reading talks about and opens up with this idea of what is the nature of femininity? What is the nature of being a woman? Is there an essential feminine essence? Is there something essential about being a woman? Certain characteristics, certain behaviors, certain ways of looking at the world. And of course, you can always find exceptions, but in general, is there a basic female nature that results in certain characteristics, certain behaviors, certain ways of looking at the world? Or is everything essentially historical and social? In other words, is what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman completely defined, or at least at the fundamental level, defined by the society or the environment or the history of which you're a part? And this is the classic kind of nature versus nurture thing. Is there something essential about being a man, something essential about being a woman, or is it really all contingent? That means dependent upon your social and historical situation. And you can ask, certainly the roles of men and women have changed radically over the past 50 years, 100 years. Or not even changed radically, they've opened up, they become more fluid. And so you can look at that and you can say, well, if gender really is completely historical and social, well then what it means to be a man and woman should be changing. And it's a really fascinating question to ask yourself. Are the essential goals, desires, needs, values of men and women, are they now differing because of the more fluid gender context we live in, or are the basic desires, goals, ways of looking at the world relatively the same? If so, then maybe it's the case that there is something fundamental about what it means to be a man and something fundamental about what it means to be a woman. Okay, so Simone de Beauvoir, her position is that there is no fixed, essential, eternal feminine essence. She is going to say that the historical and the social plays a big part in what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And in this way, she agrees with Sartre that gender roles would ultimately be a matter of choice. Because if it is the case that they're more social historical, then you have the choice of whether you're going to agree or disagree with the social and historical gender role assigned to you. And so in essence, at what philosophers would call the ontological level. Both men and women, for Beauvoir, have the same radical freedom. However, there's a fundamental difference as well, and that is that women have not had the historical opportunity to utilize their freedom. They haven't had the historical opportunity to define their identity and their life and the meaning of the world. They haven't had the historical opportunity to shape the world in terms of what they would wish it to look like. Whereas men have had that historical opportunity. And so Simone de Beauvoir essentially says, what Sartre is describing is the experience of freedom as it is experienced by men, and even more particularly by white European men. They're the ones that go out to define and go out to determine the meaning of the world. They're the ones that can make of themselves what they wish. That is not something that is available at a practical level to women and at a practical level to minorities. Now, this doesn't mean that each man, and even each white European male, has a great amount of kind of real freedom in terms of being able to do whatever they want or going to be able to define themselves in whatever way they want. I mean, think about somebody who's like a coal miner's son in that time. You're likely not going to have the opportunity to do much more than your father did. You're in that kind of pipeline. So you might say, well, that's just like a minority or just like a female at that point. They don't have many options. Their role is determined for them. But Sartre is going to say, well, there is a difference here, and Beauvoir agrees with this, and she talks about it. The difference is that men are still associated with masculinity. In other words, they're part of that group of human beings that does go out to define and determine the meaning of their lives and the world. Whereas women are part of the group of femininity, the females, that don't get to do that. So even if you are, downtrodden and you're this white male, it's not only masculinity, it's also white masculinity, you still can say to yourself, well, I may not be rich, I may not be powerful, but at least I'm not a woman, or at least I'm not a minority. And in that regard, you can associate yourself with this dominant power, this dominant group of individuals. And for Simone de Beauvoir, it is in that sense that men can still experience the kind of freedom they may not have in their personal life. Okay, so again, men have the experience of using this freedom, women have not. And again, as a general truth, men have controlled history. Men have been the ones that occupy positions of power, the leaders, the governors, so on and so forth. They've been the philosophers, the theologians, and when you might say, well, who cares about that? But what that means is that they're going to define the ultimate nature of the world. That's what happens in theology and philosophy, and so that is important. And Simone de Beauvoir gives this really kind of interesting example. She looks to Roman law. And in Rome, I guess at a certain period, women were gaining more power. And so the Romans put into place this law, which essentially, and I'm quoting here, limits the rights of women, citing the instability of the sex just when the weakening of family ties seem to threaten the interests of males. In other words, just when women seem to be getting a little bit more power, males defined the law in such a way that females no longer had that power. And so they used the law, they used society to take that power away from women. You just think about the idea of the right to vote. It is a relatively recent historical phenomenon that women have gained that right. Previous to that, they didn't have that right. They didn't get to participate in defining the basic parameters, the basic laws of society, the basic institutions of society. They did not get to participate in that. They did not have a voice. And so when you talk about freedom being the ability to define the meaning and the value of the world, if you don't have experience of that, then that kind of freedom, again, is more abstract. It's more for other people, even if you have it at the most fundamental level. Okay. So traditionally, men have been going out there defining the world, and women have been defined as the other. Men have traditionally defined the role of the woman. Men go out and do things in the world, make of themselves what they want. Women are defined as staying home and taking care of the bodily needs, the day-to-day immediate concerns. And this is one way in which women, for de Beauvoir, come to be more associated with the body than men. Men are defined by freedom, by spirit, by having a soul, by having reason. Women are more bodily. Not only because they birth children, but because that's what they take care of. That is their role in this structure. Men create the world, women take care of it. And in the reading, I listed quite a number of really fascinating questions that really prompt you to think, well, is this still the case? Does the fact that a woman takes a man's name in marriage mean that the woman is essentially saying, you're in control of our project. I belong to you now? Historically, at least at certain points, a woman taking the name of the man meant that she was his possession. Is that in any way relevant anymore? You can ask yourself. And we speak of human beings in general, and this is starting to change, but with the pronouns he and him. God is referred to as he, God the Father. Does that matter? Does that matter that we define the normal, the default position as male? Does it matter that we define the ultimate power in the universe as male? Maybe yes, maybe no. I also kind of asked this question, the popularity of women's sports, is that directly related to the ability to, or lack of clothing? The more women show off their bodies is the more popular that sport is going to become. Is that true? And is it true that we're literally, people that are looking at women's sports generally are doing it because they want to see beautiful women rather than see a sport being played? Certainly the glass ceiling would be part of this idea that maybe women don't have as much value in society. Okay, and so we get back to this idea, the ability to grant meaning and value to the world. That is something that is the definition of freedom for Sartre, and it is something that is not practically available to women. To women, that kind of freedom seems abstract. It seems unreal. It's something for someone else. And with the lack of that experience, of that freedom, you have it in one sense, but you don't have it in a much more important sense. You don't have the experience of using that freedom. And for Beauvoir, that's really critical. It's an account that is missed by Sartre. Okay, so we talk about, the reading goes on and talks about now the idea, well, why do women remain subservient, or have they historically remained subservient? I mean, they make up half the population or more. Shouldn't they just band together? Shouldn't they group themselves and form a movement? And certainly historical change has been brought about by women that have done exactly that. But in general, there hasn't been a huge kind of women's movement, everybody kind of getting together, banding together as one, fighting the patriarchy, fighting the establishment. And Beauvoir asks, well, why is that the case? And she notices that women very rarely refer to themselves as we. They are much more likely to refer and to identify themselves with their social class, with their racial class, maybe with their religion, but not as a group do they identify themselves with their gender. And so women are much more an I than a we. And that is, the result of that is that they don't, for Beauvoir, come together. Now, why is this? For Beauvoir, it's ultimately an act of bad faith. Women are trying to kind of, in a certain sense, hide, or at least many women are, hide their freedom from themselves. And why do they do that? Well, same reason anybody would try to hide their freedom from themselves, because it is easier to live as someone who doesn't believe that they are radically and absolutely free for their decisions. And so it's easier to kind of accept the role and the identity given to you. It is easier to say, what I want in life is a man to take care of me, and I want to, in a certain sense, live off him or her, or him, excuse me. And for Sartre and for Beauvoir, that's an act of bad faith, that trying to hide your freedom from yourself. And you don't do it, you don't break away from that freedom, because it is at a certain level, comfortable. Nice knowing what your identity is, knowing what your role is, rather than having to go out there and define your role for yourself. And it's a very interesting question. Does that still exist anymore? I mean, even as I say this, it seems a little antiquated. But do you get the sense that women, in general, would like to have their meaning and their identity defined for them? If so, then you're going to encounter the kind of bad faith that Beauvoir says many women exhibit. All right, so this reading is a fascinating exploration of how freedom is experienced, both from a male and, even more importantly in this case, from a female perspective. Certainly Beauvoir, by giving an account of how female freedom is experienced, or in this case, not experienced fully, thereby gives an account that critiques Sartre, at least in the pure, simplistic, absolute freedom sense. That gender may determine a role in how we experience freedom is Beauvoir's great contribution, and something worth dwelling on, and something that we really should ask ourselves as to whether it is antiquated, it's old-fashioned, it's not relevant anymore, or does her description still apply to our world today?